everyone, and welcome to what we are now calling part one of our end of 2016 podcast. It's part one because we had our usual chat looking back at the best things about 2016 and touching on some of the worst. In the company of regular guest Chris Ward and our Scottish music man Wesley Shearer, who returned after appearing on this last year. And the chat ended up being a little bit longer than normal, well over 2 hours to be honest. And we thought we can't ask people to sit down and listen to 2 hours of us gabbing on at a time. So this is part one, and it deals with film and books. And later in the month, we think round about Christmas Eve, or maybe perhaps on Christmas Eve, you'll get part two, which is a good hour's worth of chat on music, Scottish and otherwise. So if you like your music, you certainly don't want to miss that one. But as I say, this is films and this is books, the best of both from 2016. And I'll shut up now and see you on the other side of this. Hello everyone, and welcome to our end of year best of 2016 podcast. And once again, I'm joined by Wesley Shearer. Hello Wesley.
How you doing, Ali? Good to have you back. Cheers.
And the always present Chris Ward.
Hi. Always present's the nicest thing anybody.
He's always here. Thanks again for coming along doing this.
Cheers for having us.
So it's the usual thing. We're going to have a look at the films, the books, and the music, the best stuff, and maybe even some of the worst stuff of 2016. Some people say it's been a strange year. Certainly has, but we'll probably stay. We probably will touch on that at some point. But I think mainly we're going to concentrate on the good stuff. Chris, if you want to kick us off with film, what's been your kind of top films of the year?
Well, it's a rarity this year, and then my genuine favourite film of the year has actually been a Scottish film, which is not something I get to say too often, in all sincerity, without seeming like I'm pandering to the crowd.
You're fulfilling your brief.
But no, my favourite film of the year was Where You're Meant to Be.
Starring you and me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, full disclosure. It's not just because me and Ali feature prominently in one shot at the climactic Barrowlands gig. No, I just thought it was absolutely tremendous. I mean, I'd been anticipating it for a while. Big Alasdair fan, as we've been over on this podcast many times. I'm sure we even talked about the gig itself.
We did.
On that end of year pod a couple of years ago. It was for anybody who isn't familiar with it, I suppose we should catch them up on what it is. So off the back of the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow a couple of years ago, as part of the cultural programme, Aidan Moffat, former member of Alasdair, was given funding to do a kind of concert tour of Scotland, where he reworked versions of traditional folk songs into his own idiom, which meant they were full of dirty jokes and swearing and everything that you'd expect from Aidan Moffat, and were hilarious as well. And he went around Scotland with the band, including James Kelman from Twilight Sad, and Stevie Jones from El Hombre Trajeado, and he's played with a bunch of other guys as well, and Jenny Reeve from Strike Colours and Body Parts, and they played kind of free shows all over the place. They played up in the Highlands, they played at Fastlane Peace Camp, they played just tiny towns all over the country, and then ended up with a big climactic gig at the Barrowlands, and kind of threaded through it is Aidan Moffat's kind of combative relationship with Sheila Stewart, traditional folk singer, who is very determined that he not change the songs as they've been passed down to her. And is quite open about the fact that Sheila Stewart died shortly after they completed filming. Like, that's threaded through the film as well. The whole thing is kind of this structured as Aidan Moffat kind of having a conversation with her after she's died. So that's not a spoiler. I know people are very phobic of stuff like that these days. That's outlined. It's made very clear from the very beginning that Sheila is sadly no longer with us. But it's just absolutely beautiful. It's just it's one of those films that, like, it could have been so parochial and toothy, and like just warm, nostalgic, whatever. But it's so full of life and so humanistic and.
Or it could have been Moffat kind of taking the mic.
Taking piss, yeah, absolutely.
Although he never set out to do that, some
No.
people thought that's kind of what he was going to do to begin with. I think.
But
And I think Shearer thought that as well.
Absolutely, but it's so full of life and just so wise and warm and like just absolutely beautiful, really moving, and just doesn't waste time. It's over and done in like an hour and 20 minutes or something, which I appreciate as well. Like full of narrative economy, just like a really, really beautiful piece of work.
Did you get to see it?
I must confess, I've still not seen it yet. I had a ticket to see the screening at the Barrowlands, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I never made it along for whatever reason, and I've still not got around to watching it yet.
I missed that Barrowlands one. It was on the same night as something else at the film.
Yeah.
I think I had a gig or something. There was something else on that night, and I couldn't go with that one. But I went to the second screening later in the film festival, and Aidan Moffat turned up for Q&A afterwards with the director, with Paul Fegan. Paul Fegan's his name.
I think so.
Yeah, and they did a Q&A afterwards, and it was actually really, really lovely in and of itself. There was a group of folk there from the travelling community. Sheila Shearer herself was part of the travelling community, and a woman stood up and said how glad she was to see like their community represented so kind of positively on film as well, which is something that like they've never really had, for a long time. And yeah, it was really nice to see, because that's the kind of thing that maybe wouldn't even occur to you as you were watching it, that like this is something you don't see put on film that often, is like that kind of side of life or whatever, or that kind of lifestyle. And so I think it's just been a massive success all around. It's kind of starting to turn out better.
Before you go into the other films that you enjoyed during the year, it actually links to one I was going to talk about, so I might as well do it now, which was Hamish, which was the documentary about late Hamish Henderson. And actually Sheila Stewart links the two, because she appears as a younger woman in the Hamish documentary, because one of the things she did was to go around gathering these songs and making sure that they weren't lost, these folk songs that were often handed down by word of mouth, or taught from mother to daughter or whatever. And he actually had a collection of them and went to people in that community that you're talking about and listened to them, and a bit similar to what Moffat ends up doing, actually sits and listens and tries to understand the reasons that these songs were as they were and why they're so important to someone like Sheila Stewart and the rest of the community. Hamish is another amazing, really moving film. I don't greet too often in the cinema, but I certainly did there. And it was a packed out showing. There was members of the family in the audience at the GFT. And this incredible man who fought for his country when he was younger. He was given seniority at a young age, and came home. There was lots of incredible stories about his upbringing, and who his real father was. He just fell in love with Scottish song and kind of Scottish tradition at a time when it really wasn't that cool a thing to do. The kind of mid 20th century, it really wasn't. They were seen as kind of eccentrics, McDermotts and people like that, Muir, who kind of went into that. So it just had a character who just had this incredible zest and lust for life, and everything he did was actually to encourage other people to enjoy themselves as well, listen to this music, fall in love with it. It's a fantastic documentary, and if you haven't seen it, I suggest you should check it out. But yes, what else did you look at?
Before we leave the film festival behind completely, one of the other highlights for me from the film festival, I don't know if it even actually got general release, was a film with let me take a deep breath before the title, called The Sky Trembles and the Earth is Afraid and the Two Eyes Are Not Brothers, which is a late film by Ben Rivers, who is kind of a visual artist. He's done kind of non-fiction, I'd call it, rather than documentary. In the past, his last film was called A Spell Ward of the Darkness, and it kind of explored the kind of black metal scene. And that it followed like the lead singer of a black metal band who's American around first in kind of like a hippie commune somewhere in Scandinavia, and then kind of just wandering through wilderness, and then the third part is like an unbroken half-hour shot of him performing in a concert, with his band. I'm not a massive metal guy, so that film didn't really work for me to the extent I would have liked it to. You know, like I really appreciate what he was trying to do with it, but it's just not.
But the music
that
doesn't, sure.
particularly much. But this one is again kind of non-fiction, kind of, but blurs the lines a little bit. So it starts off as a documentary on the making of a French filmmaker called Oliver Lax, his second film, Moses, which is he's shooting in the foothills of the Atlas Mountains in North Africa, and it starts off as quite observational, just kind of quiet, you know, again long shots, unhurried rhythms, but then at the halfway point it kind of diverges into just pure horror, where he's abducted by like a gang of roving bandits, is like kidnapped, tortured, and made to wear like this suit of like tin cans and dance for them, and it's terrifying. Like it's like
it's quite funny as well.
It's in the abstract, it's quite funny, but it's absolutely terrifying to watch. It taps into that same kind of primal force as something like The Wicker Man, where it's just someone who is completely in over their head in an environment they don't understand, and these things are happening to them for reasons beyond their comprehension, and no one knows that they're there, and it's just absolutely, like I saw it was a matinee, it was like middle of the afternoon, and I walked out in the sunlight and was just absolutely shaking. Like it's just some of the purest and most primal like horror that I've seen in years, and it's just it happens so naturalistically as part of the film, you know, like the style from the first half of the film carries over into the second, so when all this stuff starts happening, you're like, this can't actually be this isn't part of the documentary, right? Like he didn't just stand by and film while this guy's tongue was cut out or anything like that, you know. It's really genuinely like bracing, but yeah, it just is. It's a one-off kind of thing. It's one of those things that, like, again, I don't know how wide an audience there is for how many people will sit through the first half in order to reach the second. But it's one of those ones that once you see it, you're never forgetting that it's just totally lodged in your.
Is it one of these ones you wouldn't want to watch again?
Maybe, I don't know. Like, I mean, now that I know where it goes, I think I'd maybe appreciate the first half more, knowing what was coming in the second. You know, because the first half, I'm going to admit, the first half is not a chore as such, but it's certainly quite slow going and a little bit harder work than the second half. It's worth persevering with. But yeah, that was another standout from the film festival for me this year.
Cool.
Yeah. Other than that, in terms of like kind of indie stuff, if you want to call it, I don't even know if you can call it. It's so hard to differentiate between like indie stuff. It's just fun and comes from all over the place. Like I was going to recommend Patterson, the new Jim Jarmusch film, but that's got a big Amazon logo at the start because they're distributing it. So
we'll talk a little bit about distribution. I'm really interested in the way it's changing. But on you go.
Yeah, but Patterson, wonderful as well. Like Jim Jarmusch is kind of very strong run just now between that and Only Lovers Left Alive is his first film since then. Oh, he also made a documentary about Stooges this year, which I didn't get to see yet. But yeah, Patterson follows Adam Driver, who plays a bus driver called Patterson, who lives in Patterson, New Jersey, and it just kind of details, it's a week in his life, so it goes a day-by-day structure from Monday to Sunday, and just follows his daily routine. He's a bus driver for a living, but he's a poet around that, and it just kind of follows him kind of writing poems on his lunch break, you know, before his shift starts, and just appreciating the ways that creativity can be part of someone's life, even if they're not published, even if they don't have great success outside of their own. You know, he hasn't published his poems, no one else has seen them except for his wife.
Right.
But it's just a look at how rewarding it can be to have a creative outlet.
Yeah.
That
you're not doing it particularly to make money or to become famous or anything like that.
It's just to you know, get your thoughts down on paper and how rewarding a life that can be, like the value of like routine and repetition and just kind of, you know, getting stuff done just because you feel you have a need to express something, you know, and how it's the kind of thing that cinema doesn't really celebrate that often, because it always looks as, you know, history's written by the winners, you know, whenever you get a biopic of somebody, it's always somebody who has, you know, gone on to great acclaim, or, you know, someone who's celebrated, and it's just nice to see a film where it's someone who maybe doesn't have that, but is still, you know, doing something worthwhile, and it recognises that as worthwhile, and it's almost like a kind of, especially in this year, just a vision of like a world where everybody just gets on, does their thing, is quite happy just of themselves. It seems like almost utopian, you know.
The feel normal film of the year.
Exactly, yeah, something like that. I also, again, blurring the lines between indie and mainstream. I'm not really sure like where all this funding came from. It was divisive, but I loved American Honey, Andy Arnold.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's her first one since.
Sheila Booth I always kind of bristle a little bit.
You know what? I think I know he's one of these guys that the persona can put a lot of people off. I think when he gets a chance to actually do good work, he's often very good in the role. But it's 3 hours long nearly. It flies by. Yeah, it really is lengthy, but it absolutely flew by for me. I mean, I saw it at the end of a very long weekend where I almost didn't go see it because I was I'm shattered, but I just did not feel like sitting down for a 3 hour film about nothing in particular. But
put that on the poster.
Yeah, exactly.
3 hour film about nothing in particular.
Well, that's underselling it. That's the quality of the film. But it's one of these ones. It's not the most plot driven of films, and I was just conscious of the fact that if I didn't go see it there and then I might not get another chance to see it. So I forced myself to go, and absolutely was just bowled over by it. It's just one of these things that has some of the most absolutely amazing marriages of image and sound of the year. The soundtrack is just constant. It doesn't let up. It's just needle drop after needle drop, the kids in the film. So it's about a teenager from the Midwest in America or rural America who has a terrible home situation. She's living in poverty. She's got younger brothers and sisters, and she just kind of runs out on it one day and joins a crew of magazine sellers, other teenagers who go across the country in a van selling magazine subscriptions, in inverted commas. It's clearly some kind of scam.
Right.
And it's just about her kind of finding community with them. But yeah, as I say, the soundtrack is just constant. It's so much contemporary hip hop and R&B. There's a big moment where they all start dancing to Rihanna in a supermarket, and yeah, it's just really, again, full of energy and
a realistic scene, not
it's not like a musical number. It's just it comes on the speakers and everybody just starts kind of singing along with it, and Shia LaBeouf jumps up on a checkout and starts kind of that kind of thing. But yeah, just again so full of life.
Because Andrea Arnold took, and she made Red Road. Right?
She made Red Road and Fish Tank.
That was one I couldn't remember.
And she adapted Wuthering Heights as well.
Which is a fantastic version.
So this is her first American film, and it's got that same kind of thing as maybe Paris, Texas, or something like that, where it's an outsider's view of America. You know, so it maybe romanticizes it to a degree, and it's not afraid to go broad and play with big kind of obvious symbols. There's at one point a woman wearing a set of Confederate flag underwear, that kind of thing. It really doesn't shy away from big, potentially cliched images, but it's so energetic and so it taps into something in youth culture just now that I was willing to forgive it. All of that, cool. I thought it was great. In terms of bigger stuff, I mean, it's weird talking about some of these things because it feels like they came out so long ago with stuff from the start of the year. I thought The Hateful Eight was really strong. Tarantino's last film, absolutely loved it. I didn't like Django Unchained at all.
Yeah,
that was the first kind of follower for me. I've stayed with Tarantino through everything. Django, so I felt both Kill Bills, Death Proof, all of it. But Django was where it felt he'd lost his footing a little bit for me, but he came back really strong with The Hateful Eight, I think, and again it really tapped into something in the zeitgeist just now of America having to face up to what is done.
What it's about to do.
A grim reckoning for its sins. But yeah, really, and again, I'm glad to see the Western come back in a big way as well. Bone Tomahawk this year was really strong as well, which is a kind of horror Western, it was kind of
Westerns seem to be
kind of territory.
Westerns seem to be making I can't remember, there was Slow West last year, which was a fantastic film. But
and in terms of other kind of big names doing strong work this year, the Coen Brothers' Hail Caesar I really enjoyed. It was absolutely fantastic. Again, another example of their kind of lighter ones not necessarily being as light as they first appear to be. I think there's a lot more substance to it than a lot of people give it credit for. There's a lot of a quite serious examination of faith, and belief, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from a film with a very homoerotic musical number with Channing Tatum and a bunch of sailors singing No Dames. Shane Black's comeback, The Nice Guys, his return to actually doing what he actually does best rather than getting Marvel pay him so he could go make it. His last film before this was Iron Man 3.
Yeah, it was.
Traces of Shane Black, but this is the pure unfiltered hit of Shane Black that I've been waiting for since Kiss Kiss Bang Bang came out. Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling, like, fantastic, both of them, like, really amazing pairing. Great chemistry, both of them hilarious. Like, I haven't laughed harder at any film this year. There's one key moment where Ryan Gosling channels Abbott and Costello expertly, and it's absolutely hilarious.
It's funny, The Last Boy Scout was on TV the other night. I hadn't seen it in years, which was an early Shane Black script, and it's brilliant. It's full of zingers. It's full, like, just few people can write a kind of cool script like he can. Yeah, absolutely great. And I don't know, it's one of those ones when I first saw it I was like, I don't know how I feel about this in comparison to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, but at the same time it's kind of got even more of a Shaggy Dog quality and a more kind of relaxed pace than Kiss Kiss Bang Bang does. But I'm just happy for him, even if he, like, only does one of these every 5, 6, 7 years or something. I'm always happy to go back to Shane Blackland, you know. Yep. It's always Christmas in Shane Blackland.
It's always Christmas in Shane Blackland. In terms of, like, other American stuff, Richard Linklater's Everybody Wants Some, I liked a lot. His follow-up to Boyhood was kind of his take on a campus comedy, like end of the 70s, early 80s, kind of apparently largely autobiographical. His usual kind of, again, humanistic take on, just characters that have the potential to be repellent stereotypes, but he just invests everybody with so much love and warmth and affection that you kind of go along with it. Robert Eggers' The Witch, which is one of the great debuts of this year. Again, a horror film on its surface, but really maybe has more in common with the likes of Dreyer and Bergman. Just very austere, deliberate framing, and builds to one of my favourite endings of any film this year, which would be completely terrible to spoil on this. But the climactic scene of The Witch is fairly jaw-dropping. Mia Hansen-Love's Things to Come I really like. She's the French filmmaker who made Eden, which I think we talked about last year, which was a film about the kind of French touch scene, like the rise of Daft Punk and all the kind of associated acts around them. So this one stars Isabelle Hupert in contention for greatest actress in the world, and she's a philosophy professor whose life starts to unravel in various ways, but she deals with it with grace and humour and dignity because she's Isabelle Hupert, and that just comes naturally to her. Again, just it's another one where the details make it sound, again, in the abstract. You can say that, and it's something that nobody would ever want to sit through, but to watch just
she's been in a few films like that as well,
but again, just very, like, human, warm, and wise, and I think that's I'll leave it there. I think real review. I will put in a shout for the conclusion of one of my favourite trilogies to come out of Hollywood in recent years, which was The Purge election year.
The
first one is okay, but Purge Anarchy is. I'm doing the Italian chef.
He's smacking his lip.
Like a pure shot of like grindhouse throwback, and election year didn't quite hit the peaks of anarchy, but it was very much welcome this year of all years.
Wesley, have you had any time for any trips to the cinema this year?
I have actually. I started going a lot more towards the end of the year. The list of indie films I've got to catch up with are as long as my lanky, spindly arms. But I've, in terms of the kind of more bigger releases, well, actually saying that, going back to the earlier in the year, I don't know if it's fair to. Do you know what? It is fair to include it because it was a January release over here, but it was in everybody's end of year list last year. Was Room. Room for me was just astonishing. Like, sitting in that cinema watching that film, knowing what the subject matter was about and how it really could have been driven down a different path in terms of kind of crassness or poor taste. That actually shook me to my core. Like, I was actually shaking in the cinema watching that film. That was a real standout for me at the start of the year, but as I say, that was kind of more of a end of year list from last. But Anomalisa really took me by surprise this year. I really, really liked that. It's had a lot of sniffy reviews. It's had a lot of kind of contrasting reviews. I know a lot of people who have hailed it as one of Charlie Kaufman's best, and others who have said it's nowhere near as good as his previous work. But yeah, for me, it's such a weird film to describe, because you describe Anomalisa to people and why you enjoyed it, and I mean, the whole premise of it is just so overwhelmingly depressing. But it's probably one of his most human films that he's ever made, I think. There's like even from the very, very opening scene, just the subtle attention to detail that he pays to, like, even some of the Foley work that's on it and some of the other things that gets added to it. Just the way that these characters, it's all stop motion animation for anyone who hasn't seen it, so it's not real actors, but it was based on a radio play which then took into this kind of stop motion film, and yeah, that was pretty astonishing. Very, very grim. There's not really any sort of nicely rounded payoff.
Yeah.
It just kind of leaves you just sitting like, wow, this is depressing. But it's if you want a kind of challenging film to watch, but it's also very simple to follow, then I think that's a good one to check out from kind of Kaufman's body of work. But yeah, very recently the one that's kind of stuck with me was Arrival, to be honest. Denis Villeneuve, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, I think it's Villeneuve, maybe, potentially. I'm looking at Chris here for some...
I've always gone with Villeneuve.
Yeah, let's go for Villeneuve, yeah. So he's been a kind of funny one for me. Like, I remember when he brought out Prisoners, and that was one of those ones I just kind of went to see on a whim, enjoyed it more than I thought I did. It had some kind of redeeming qualities to it, but overall it wasn't particularly brilliant, but it was, you know, a good foray into the kind of mainstream cinema, if you like, because I think he'd just done French language films before that. And then Sicario was one of those films that I felt like I enjoyed at the time, and the more I thought about it, the more I hated it, because you've got this kind of lead female character who is supposed to be really strong, and she's painted that way, and then by the last third of the film the whole thing unravels and she's an emotional wreck who's relying on, you know, the men around her to prop her up and save her. So that kind of was a sore one for me, but it was beautiful and the score was fantastic. But Arrival was obviously the first one I've seen him kind of moving into the sci-fi territory, and yeah, like it's like sci-fi with a proper like melancholic heart to it. Yeah, like even at its most implausible, it was still a really, really good film to watch. And yeah, it was like one of these alien invasion films where the aliens actually just aren't really a part of the film, and aren't really like part, like the timing of its release as well was kind of uncanny with, you know, Trump and Brexit and everything else that's kind of happening in the political climate at the moment. It seemed a really good film to hammer home the idea of communicating.
Yeah, it's about communication, isn't it?
It's about communication and about, you know, looking at things from a different point of view, and for, like, without spoiling anything, because it's not a spoiler, but at least the female character in this film actually stays strong and independent throughout, right till the very end. I mean, it's cheesy in parts, and it's got a kind of romance running through it, but it's shot beautifully. I mean, it owes a lot to Kubrick and more than one or two.
It's shot by Bradford Young, who's the guy who shot Selma. Most Violent Year a couple of years ago. He's like a really up and coming cinematographer. He's one of these guys that you see his name in the credits and you know that you're at least going to see something that looks great.
What did you think about the film?
I liked how process driven it was. I liked how much of it was just a case of them like kind of trial and error, you know, just going back, trying the same thing over and over again with minor variations and to try and communicate with them. Again, I think I've got a kind of quite similar take on it to Wesley. Not everything about it worked for me, and I haven't really liked a lot of Villeneuve stuff before. But yeah, I think this is definitely the strongest thing I've seen from him. And again, like I say, it's technically impeccable. Like, you know, if nothing else, you've got like the visuals, as I say, from Bradford Young, and then the music by John Johansson.
Oh, the music,
is tremendous as well. And Amy Adams is fantastic.
Yeah, because I think I did a double bill with that and Nocturnal Animals, which was so beautifully shot that it was almost flawed because of it.
Yeah.
So seeing Amy Adams in both of those roles, like within 24 hours of each other, like that Arrival was her film in a way that she wasn't really allowed to kind of shine in Nocturnal Animals a little bit, because I think Tom Ford had just kind of got his stranglehold on everyone in the film and just didn't allow any breathing
I'm
space.
interested in Tom Ford as a filmmaker.
Yes, I don't know. Yeah.
Partly you think, should this work at all? And it's so surface.
Yeah.
But there is substance to his films as well, I think.
I didn't see Nocturnal Animals. I remember liking a Single Man.
Single Man
was great, yeah.
But yeah, no, I haven't seen Nocturnal Animals yet. I've heard it's another one I've heard very mixed things.
Yeah.
Like wildly diverse.
Well, and I think a bit like Kaufman, I think he will split a lot of people that will really like.
I think the thing with Nocturnal Animals was that Tom Ford is clearly talented, in, you know, from the aesthetics point of view, and even from, you know, the way that he directs these scripts, but I think he's clearly at a higher standard than a lot of other directors, considering it's only his second film. So when I came out of Nocturnal Animals, my main frustration was that it was so particular and so perfect that it stopped it from being a 5-star film for me, that it brought it down to a 4-star film. That's such a weird criticism, I think, but as I said, there were other parts of the film where I thought they could have taken the story in a different direction, but it just stopped from letting those actors breathe in the film and in the roles in the way that Arrival didn't, because as I said, it was very much a way that Amy Adams kind of carried that whole way through. But for me, basically, that the promising thing is that he's now going to direct Blade Runner, the second Blade Runner, so 2049 or whatever it's called. So now that he's done a sci-fi film, I'm kind of like, oh, well, maybe I'm not too worried about Blade Runner now. I'm still got a lot of reservations about it, but at least I know that he can maybe direct some sci-fi, so that's promising. And if it's not good, then at least I know the score will be good. So yeah.
I'm just going to mention before we move on to books. I was going to mention Where You Meant to Be, because I get like you. I thought it was an amazing film, and really not what I expected. I thought it would be a kind of slightly light musical travelogue or something like that, ended up with this big concert at the Barras, which does happen in a way, but the personal relationship between Sheila Stewart and Aidan Moffat is just wonderful, and a bit like the best of his songs. They can be kind of bawdy and filthy and all that things, but they can also kind of break your heart and move you in ways that you really don't expect. Hamish we've spoken about, but the other one is, I just saw this recently, and it's called 16 Years Till Summer. Again, it's a documentary. It's set in the Highlands, filmed over 4 years, and we're following this character called Ishdan, a kind of Gaelic name, and we find out, I'm trying again avoiding spoilers, but we find out early on he's now looking after his elderly father. He's out of jail. They've allowed him out of jail where he's serving time for murder, to look after his father. And I really can't say much more to it than that without spoiling things, but it's incredible. I mean, it's you're thinking, is this made? If you were to write the plot of this film, you would know it's ridiculous, but the characters in it, and this kind of central character who's a real fantasist, who really thinks, he's been a heroin addict and he's problems in his past, and goes on to problems in his future. It's quite astonishing. It's not really like anything about it. It feels unfinished, but only because it's real life. So it's not going to be tied up and happy or whatever, or go in the direction that you expect. And you never hear anyone speaking to him from behind the camera. He just speaks to the camera. So it's almost like you and he are having this conversation, and you're going, God, don't do that, you're doing that. And then with everyone that's involved, you just have your head in your hands at times. But 16 Years Till Summer, you should really check it out. It was on at the GFT just recently, and I think it might make an appearance at this year's film festival as well, which I'm looking forward to. But books of the year, I'm going to go through a few, but we're going to talk briefly about the way films. I promise us the way films are now marketed. Just because you mentioned the different indie films, and you said about big blockbusters, but increasingly it seems that this all came about because I wanted to see Ron Howard's Beatles film, and I couldn't find out where it was going to be on in Glasgow, and I think it was on one day and then away again, and then it's now out on DVD, but you could watch it online. And compare this to Ron Howard's, was it Inferno, the latest the Dan Brown thing, which was on everywhere for about a week till people realised it's rubbish, and it came down again. So just this way of treating films like, I mean, when the new Rogue One comes on, it's probably going to be in every, cinema.
I counted up yesterday on Friday in the Cineworld in Renfrew Street alone, there are 26 screenings of Rogue One.
I mean, how do you think indie cinema, and we're going to talk about indie publishing and indie music labels as well later on, but how indie cinema is going to kind of get around this, because they're not going to end up in these places.
I mean, I don't know, It's a difficult one because on the one hand, like, I can kind of obviously see the need to continue to make money by any means necessary. You know, at the end of the day, it's a business. You know, and people need to get their films out to audiences. So whether that's a case of, I mean, I don't know if Ron Howard is necessarily the best example of indie cinema.
No, I don't mean indies, but just.
But I know what you mean in terms of like the. You find it more and more with kind of music documentaries in particular that they become these one night special things. Or
like a gig almost.
Yeah, and it's inflated ticket prices as well. They did the same thing with the Nick Cave film, What's More With Feeling, which I still haven't seen because, again, like the only screenings were these one-off, you know, like which sold out like that, you know, because people love Nick Cave and people, especially this album, had so much publicity because of the circumstances that led to it, or that happened while it was being made. People were obviously keen to see it. And it's shot in 3D as well, which makes it another thing, you know, it would be really good to see in the cinema. But they did a one night only kind of thing with it the night before the album came out, and then that was it. I think they maybe did like a one encore screen on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, that's the one I managed to go to see, so yeah.
But I still haven't seen it, and again, it's frustrating, but I mean, it'll come out on DVD and Blu-ray, and I'm sure it'll be on video on demand soon enough, but it's again finding like the audience for stuff like this. Even like, obviously, you know, God love the GFT, it does great work, but at the same time it's frustrating when, you know, the more kind of esoteric niche stuff that the GFT should be there to cater for and provide a home for, gets shunted to the side so that they can screen like, you know, Arrival for a fortnight. It's like, well, Arrival doesn't really need the help. Arrival like went to #1 in the US box office. It has Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner. You know, I get why the GFT would have an interest in showing it because they showed Past Work of Denis Villeneuve before he kind of went mainstream in inverted commas, you know, and maybe they want to have the continuity of, you know, an auteur or something like that. But at the same time, there's quite often a sense in some of their programming choices that it's for people who are too snobby to go to the Cineworld, you know.
Yeah,
it's films that will get shown at every other multiplex, and it's like, well, again, GFT has to make his money somehow.
Sure.
And you know, but it means that there's a kind of a hole almost that doesn't get filled, where the films that should be playing for a week, a fortnight at the GFT to give people a chance to see them come and go in a couple of days.
They're on at 2:10 in the afternoon as well. Yeah.
And it's really frustrating. I think there's been an acceptance to the degree that a lot of people now, rather than go to the cinema, are quite comfortable just staying at home and doing video on demand, or, you know, renting. Like most of the smaller films, most of the stuff that we play at the GFT now, I catch up on Blu-ray or rent it at the end of the year, which is why, you know, there's still so much from this year that I have to catch up on. I think as well, like, it's something to do with the rise of digital, certainly for me, is that it feels like less of an event going to the cinema almost, because the print that you're seeing is essentially the same print you're going to see when you watch it at home in the same kind of quality. You know, if you get a Blu-ray on your TV, it's more or less identical to a digital projection. It's not, I mean, you get the experience of watching it with a crowd at the cinema, but you're not really losing anything in terms of the quality in the same way that you would if you went and saw like a 35mm projection or something like that. There's nothing unique about the print anymore, which is why maybe people are okay to wait. The absolute worst example of this is Cineworld, obviously enough, like funnily enough, for when you're talking about crimes against cinema. So their big thing just now to try and get people back to cinema is, you know, all the gimmicks. So there's 4DX when your seat moves, and there's like rain and wind and stuff. There's the VIP screens there's the VIP screenings where you can pay like 30 quid and you get like a buffet and a reclining seat and stuff like this. And then there's a super screen, which is like not quite an IMAX, but it's bigger than a usual cinema screen. To make room for that super screen, the super screen is on the first floor of the Cineworld. It's in what was the biggest screen anyway. To make room for that, they made the screen next to it smaller, which means that the screen is now only as wide as standard widescreen. So if you see anything that's shot in CinemaScope, it's letterboxed. And it's like, why would I go to the cinema to see a letterboxed film? Like, that just fully like rams home that there's essentially no difference between, you know, watching it at home on your TV. It's the same thing. You'd watch it, if you were watching a film that was shot in that aspect ratio at home, it would have the black bars at the top and bottom. One of the big advantages of seeing it in the cinema is it fills the screen. And now if it's not even filling the screen, then what's the point in going to the cinema, you know?
I mean, I think you were glad you saw Nick Cave in the cinema rather than just waiting for it to come.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, well, partly because I think the experience washed off more being in the cinema, because I don't think I've ever been in a screening that was full and sold out, where at the end of the film every single person remained in their seat until the last credit rolled and the house lights went up and then all left in utter silence. So that's the thing that makes that film stick with you even more, because you've watched it in a cinema, you've watched it with potentially like-minded people, because it's a Nick Cave film. It's pretty niche as much as it's got a big appeal on so many screens across the UK. But as Chris was saying, you go to the cinema to get that certain experience that you don't get when you're at home. Sometimes, and a lot of the time, when you're watching it in big multiplexes like Cineworld, that experience that you don't get at home can be detrimental to the film, but that's the risk you take when you go to the cinema. But you go to see it on a massive screen. That's exactly the first thing I noticed when I went to the screen next door to the super screen and noticed a letterbox, and I was like, what is this? Why am I here sitting watching this film in this way? Like, that is insane, just because of the super screen next door. And I mean, I have an unlimited card for Cineworld just because it means I can go and see films whenever I want, and I mean, it's kind of crazy not to, but it feels like even people like that who are paying money every month and regularly going to the cinema and maybe paying extras on top when they're at the cinema are being shunted out because they're wanting to attract people to VIP. Who's going to go to the cinema and pay VIP? Like, I want to meet these people that want to do that and pay 35, 40 quid for a finger buffet, and I don't even think there's a drink included in it, and yet, like, oh, it's insanity. It's like,
I'd love to know if they're doing okay with that. Yeah,
I know. But it is interesting though, like when you were talking about how these kind of indie films will kind of compete with the bigger ones, because Chris touched on it earlier, like the lines are becoming increasingly blurred between the two.
That's true.
So there's this sort of like, this obviously been about for a few years, but I was kind of thinking about this a few weeks ago, and how there's this kind of Trojan marketing thing that everybody's been talking about for a few years, where the indies will put so much money into their marketing budget on top of everything else to market this indie film as a big blockbuster film to try and get the crossover appeal, and then the crossover appeal comes and people get disappointed because it's not been marketed in the way that they think it is.
Drive was the
biggest example of that.
You're going to see like a Fast and Furious film and then go
exactly
Drive is, which is not that.
Did someone not try and file a lawsuit against Drive or something like that because it was missold to them? Obviously it was ludicrous and didn't go anywhere, but that's exactly the perfect example of it. And it's interesting because, I mean, you understand why some of these indies do that, because they do want a big appeal, and a lot of these indies, if they do reach a big appeal, I mean, it might work, and they can, you know, take in a lot of money. Like Room was one of the examples in a way. Like, well, it's not exclusively an indie, it was got a lot of a wider appeal than I thought it would, I think, and took a lot more money than I think people expected, but it also is sort of detrimental in a little way to the people that it's trying to attract, because the way they cut trailers now to appeal to the mass market then put people who want to go to see indie films off of it, because the trailers look so bloody awful because of the way they're like, see the amount of films that I've seen recently that are maybe indie-ish, you know, have got some big budget behind it, and I watch the trailer, I go, that looks terrible, I would not watch that based on that trailer alone if I didn't know other things about the story. Trailers these days are absolutely terrible.
I agree with you. Trailers they either give away the whole film or they sell you a different film.
Yeah, entirely. So it's difficult, I think, for indies to compete, but they are doing it, and they're doing it well to an extent.
I guess the reason for that is now that people see, you know, a new trailer come. An example in work yesterday was the new Spider-Man trailer came out. Within 5 minutes, I heard someone talking about who was playing the Vulture, and because people, it's immediate. Whereas before, the only place you really saw movie trailers was maybe on telly, but on other films that you've been to see. So they already had the audience that they thought, well, I'm going to sell this to. You weren't trying to sell it to a different audience, they'll try to sell it to you. No, it's...
I think the way forward for it is to maybe find a niche and play to it mercilessly. You know, like the example I'm thinking of is maybe like home video companies like Masters of Cinema, Arrow, BFI to an extent, and now just this year finally the UK Criterion, who have been doing amazing stuff in the US for years and years and years, this kind of speciality art house home video label, like impeccable presentation that's like the byword for like the absolute finest, you know, DVDs, Blu-rays, whatever, Laserdisc when they started, and they finally launched in the UK this year, and a very small subsection of the populace was massively excited for this. It's the kind of thing that like you say to like 99% of people, Criterion's coming to the UK, and they won't care, but like that 1% is going to be more excited than they've been for anything else this year, and you know that's it. Like they're willing to pay a little bit more for something that they know is good, that has like that mark of quality on it, maybe even buy films that they've had before, because they're now available in these Criterion editions that have like these like additional, you know, features on them, and have like impeccable audio visual quality, all that kind of stuff. You know, it's collectors is who you aim at. Or people who, you know, would get excited that Isabelle Hupert is in a new film or something like that, or, you know, play up the kind of the auteur aspect, like whoever's directing it, or maybe like the cinematographer is working on this and you've liked him in the past. You know, it's like that seems to me like a more profitable route to go down ultimately than than trying to please everybody. Play up the aspects that will really get people who are into that already talking about it and trying to encourage people to go with them maybe, and then they can evangelise and spread the word about it themselves, rather than just trying to make Manchester by the Sea look like a standard weepy melodrama, that I don't want to see, rather than something I'm massively excited about because it's the new Kenneth Lonergan film or whatever.
That's exactly it, yeah.
That's interesting. Talking about independence then, I'm going to do a little bit on my favourite books of the year, and the vast majority of them, just having a look here, are on small independent publishers. I'm going to start off with one which isn't actually, which came out on Polygon, but Stuart Cosgrove's Young Soul Rebels, non-fiction. Musical autobiography, you would say. It's funny, as a writer, Cosgrove writes like he broadcasts. It's 100 miles an hour and he goes everywhere. But for any music fan, this is a great book because it's about being obsessed, and he's obsessed with Northern Soul music. And he goes into it deep rather than wide, and just for the recommendations he gives you lots of recommendations of music to go and seek out. I love that about a good musical biography, that it makes you want to go and maybe discover things that you haven't previously. But at times very funny, at times really moving, because he talks about a lot of people on the scene who for whatever reason are no longer there, and I think it's a music, there's screeds of books been written on punk and on new wave and on Manchester or on house music or anything like that, but not a lot on Northern Soul music, which was a huge scene for a short period of time, in the 70s, wasn't it, in the mid-70s, and Cosgrove kind of rectifies that a bit by going into it. So for any music fan, I think you'll enjoy it. There was The Waves Burn Bright by Ian Maloney, which is about the Piper Alpha. Well, it's set. That's the setting, the Piper Alpha disaster, which happened off in the North Sea off Aberdeen. But really, it's about family falling apart as a result of kind of post-traumatic stress disorder from someone who was involved on it. And it's Ian Maloney's written a few books now, but I think this one is perhaps his best. Pauline Lynch, known as P.K. Lynch, on her book Armadillos, and that's because she thought it better to be gender neutral, which I think is an interesting thing. I don't think that's the case these days, but this is something that she decided on. Armadillos, as a little aside, she was Lizzie in the original Trainspotting. Right at all. She's an actress as well as a writer, and we spoke to her on the podcast, so anyone could go and have a listen to that. But her book Armadillos is set in Texas. It's about it's incredibly, you were talking about something that's dark with hardly any redeeming features at all, but there's still something to, in inverted commas, enjoy about that. Well, this is really dark the way it starts out, that the character runs away from home. Central character, young teenage girl, runs away from home, has to get away from home, and then ends up in a kind of commune, a city commune, which is led by the one Scottish character in there who's obsessed with JFK's assassination. There's some lovely little touches in there. One of the people, it's called Armadillos, and one of the characters makes rubber armadillos to sell at the side of the road, and it's got great characters in it. It doesn't shy away from its subject matter at all. It takes it very, very seriously, which is abuse, sexual and psychological, and it's a real triumph. A very difficult book to write, I would imagine. David Ross's, he wrote a book called The Last Days of Disco, came out a few years ago, maybe even last year, which is set in Kilmarnock, and about mobile DJs who a couple of guys who are mobile DJs. It's a phenomenon that again, a bit like Northern Soul, came and went very quickly because clubs then became very, but in the early 80s there really wasn't a club culture. It really started again when house music came over.
That was one of them.
Was it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. So people basically, any party, let's hire a mobile DJ. You leave a number in the paper or in the local shop, and say mobile DJ for hire.
Like everybody had like an uncle who did it. Or something.
Yeah, exactly. Aye. Or and I remember going to a wedding years ago, one of the first weddings I went to up at Winmore, and the DJ turned up, and there'd been a flood in his flat, and he only had turned up with 4 records. One of which was Ghost Town. No, it wasn't. That's not true.
That's the Father Ted.
That's Father Ted. No, it wasn't. It was the Jam, Town Called Malice. That's what it was. I remember because he played it over and over again. And that's right. That when I saw that in Father Ted, I went, it's very similar to what happened. Anyway, it's a real. His follow-up is a book called The Rise and Fall of the Miraculous Vespers, and it's young band starting out who eventually make it onto Top of the Pops. And I think anyone involved with the music business and involved in bands will recognise a lot of the stuff that goes on there. And it actually came with the sort of single that got them to Top of the Pops, which was written and performed by Bobby Bluebell. Blobby Bluebell. Bobby Bluebell.
It was an all-house party crossover.
Exactly. So that's it's a very enjoyable novel. I'm talking music. James Yoxton's debut novel came out, 3 Claws. And it's actually not about music at all. It's very dark, which perhaps is not on.
A running theme of 2016, eh?
Yeah, it really is a running theme of 2016.
Can't think why.
But it's about a young guy who's in London, tried to crack it as an artist. He is not cracking it as an artist, so gets invited to go home to a little village on the east coast of Scotland and does that. Meets on the way what we euphemistically call a character. A guy who decides to kind of gub all his speed and then sit beside him on the bus and then back up, and and he can't get rid of this character anyway. But and it's got these brilliant first person narratives in it, dispersed throughout, which are just great. Another fine book to look out. I read quite a lot. I'm not in the past. I haven't read a lot of crime fiction, but I did this year. And The Dead Don't Boogie by Douglas Skelton, which was real noir fiction, but done kind of tongue-in-cheek. The main character speaks like James Cagney or something like that, but it's again set in Glasgow in the west coast of Scotland. And he's a kind of gumshoe, and there's like hardman priests, and there's like every cliche that you'd expect from that kind of
hard-boiled detective,
Raymond Chandler type stuff. But it's done with a good sense of fun about it. It's extraordinarily violent as well. It's kind of like there is shades of Tarantino in it, without a doubt. Collection of short stories by a writer called Lara Williams. It's called Treats. I love short stories. I think they're really underrated, not just form of writing, but people ignore them at their peril. Some of the best books of the last few years have been short story collections by Kirsty Logan and Annalisa McIntosh, Vicky Jarrett. And Lara Williams' Treats is up there with them. I'm going to hopefully have a wee chat about James Kelman later on, and some of his best work is his short stories, without a doubt. So talking about indie publishers, these are all kind of on, most of these books are on indie publishers, and that includes The Making of Mickey Bell by Kellen McInnes, which was such an experimental book. It's got a talking dog in it, it's got I think it's Swedish, but it might be Dutch porn star who's touring on a big drop handle motorbike. It's just, it's all sorts of weird stuff goes on in it. But I don't think a bigger publisher would have touched it with a barge pole. I think it's a really experimental, unusual novel, which actually works. It shouldn't, because there's so much stuff getting thrown at it, but it really does work. And I think that's interesting to consider. Doug Johnson's latest one, Crash Land. With Doug, you always know what you're going to get. It's 100 miles an hour, plane crashes and we're off. And basically, I honestly read this in one night just because you can't kind of put it down. You want to know what happens at the end. I don't think it's quite his best work, but it's if you like Doug Johnson, you've probably read it already. My favourite book of the year, after much thought, is Kevin McNeil's The Brilliant and Forever. And he's one of our best writers, I think, Kevin McNeil anyway. Stornoway Way was an amazing debut novel. It's again got talking animals, this time alpaca. There was a lot of talking animals in Scottish fiction this year. There was a talking toad in James Robertson's novel as well. But it's alpaca. It's set on an island. It's an island where everyone's a writer, and there's a competition every year called The Brilliant and Forever. And I think it's something like 8 or maybe 10 writers are allowed in, and there's the winners, the judges vote, and then there's a people's vote. And I can't really say too much without giving things away, but it's good. Kevin's also a great poet, and you can tell that in his use of language. But this made me laugh out loud at times, and then but it also makes commentary about how we value people and how we value what we're talking about today, art. So, you're talking earlier about Patterson and the poet who writes poetry because he wants to write poetry. It gives him a richer life. This is kind of looking at this idea that everything that you create has to be judged, and if it's not judged well, then you are a failure. And it takes that idea to absolutely to its extreme. The Brilliant Forever is brilliant. Yeah. Chris, have you got hands to read any information?
Much of my year was taken up. I mean, I should really learn to stop undertaking projects of this size, given my general reading pace these days. We were talking off mic about everybody just being generally exhausted by work, so I tend to go through it like maybe 4 pages at a time before my eyes start to get heavy. But this year I finally decided to take a crack at Moby Dick.
Excellent choice.
Which was, very, loved it. Absolutely loved it. It's exactly my thing, which is archaic slang put in the mouths of sailors. But I, absolutely astonishing piece of work, but it did limit the amount of time I could devote to anything else this year, given my pace of a couple of pages a night before my eyes get heavy. The one, again, as usual, I always find one at least published this year. And this year it was, probably surprised to no one, Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, Run, which is in fact not an indie, but is great. It's everything you could have wanted it to be. I think it's the best musician's autobiography that I've read since Dylan's Chronicles. It's just absolutely catnip.
And he wrote it.
Oh, he definitely wrote it. There's no mistaking that voice for anyone else. From the very first pages, no ghostwriter could ever have done this, could ever have pulled this off. It's been compared to his narrative voice, and it's been compared to obviously his songs, but I think that's maybe a little bit off. I think that a closer approximation of it is his spiels between songs at his gigs.
Yeah.
That kind of rock and roll sermon kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where he it's a big communal experience. We're all here to for the power of rock and roll, all that kind of stuff, but it's very much that kind of tone, just celebratory and communal, and everybody's involved and everybody's invited. It doesn't shy away from the darkness. It gets into his kind of troublesome relationship with his father and all that kind of stuff. His struggles with mental health issues over the years, which I know is something that surprised a lot of people when it came out, because obviously he's Bruce Springsteen. You just think he's this invincible figure who is in his 60s now and still looks better than I have ever looked in my life. It's inimitably him. I think, as I say, absolutely. But if fans haven't read it, I imagine fans who haven't read it already will all be expecting copies in their stockings at Christmas. But it does not disappoint in any way. One of my favourite things about it is how deep it dives into the kind of world of Jersey Shore and all that before he releases
the early years.
The early years, it's split into volumes within the book. And the first volume is entirely about everything leading up to everything pre-Born to Run. And those first 2 Springsteen albums, the Springsteen canon generally runs Born to Run through a Tunnel of Love, right? That's the ones that everybody can agree on are the great ones. But I still love those first 2 albums so much, because they sound like nothing else that he did, and they just sound so kind of young and full of life, and just they're young man's albums, you know, and that carries across. And when he's talking about everything that went into the making of them in his childhood upbringing, even another aspect of like the kind of childhood aspects really remind me of is like Terrence Malick almost, is this kind of like imagistic, very like snatches, fragmented, just kind of portraits of just growing up in mid-century America. It really reminded me of like the childhood sections of Tree of Life. To a degree, which again is not really necessarily something I expected from Springsteen's memoirs, but it's absolutely becomes highest recommendation. Like
it's more than Cars and Girls.
It's so much more than Cars and Girls. I know I have a friend who refuses to listen to Prefab Sprout because of that song, because of his loyalty to the boss. He will not be swayed on the
not just that song, but
not just that song. Oh, that's tainted them for him.
Oh.
That's completely tainted by Cars and Girls. Yeah.
What about you, Wes? Have you?
Much the same as last year, Ali. Not got round to actually reading that much this year. Honestly, I used to be such an avid reader, and I just can't seem to find time for it just now, which is a real shame. But aside, Springsteen aside, the only other thing I really read this year, which turned out to be fantastic, was just actually had to look up the name of it because I read it that long ago and I can't remember the name of it. Was Sarah Pascoe's book, Animal,
brilliant.
The Anatomy of a Female Body, which was just an absolute joy to read from start to finish. It kind of takes on that whole thing that kind of Caitlin Moran started a while back, which although I'm not her biggest fan, there's been a lot of books that have come out since then, but she really seems to capture something that a lot of these other books haven't, and I just think it's a really great book that a lot of guys should read, because it goes through a really deep understanding. It kind of aims to tell you, although it's written towards the female reader, it gives you a kind of good understanding of a lot of sexism that women have to face, and a lot of targeted sexism in the workplace and their life and their relationships, and it kind of gives you a deeper understanding of all of that, and it's absolutely hilarious from start to finish. It's just written in such an honest way. It doesn't seem like she's deliberately tried to write in any particular style other than just her own scatterbrain style of comedy writing, the way she speaks. I just happened to come across it on a Adam Buxton podcast, and she was talking about it.
I heard that one there.
So that was a really, really good read, and I'd encourage anyone to read it.
Talking about music books, one I read, I'm Not With the Band by Sylvia Patterson, who's Scottish journalist who wrote for...
So the Herald, right?
She did write regular for the Herald, but she wrote for the NME as well back then. Smash Hits. She was big at Smash Hits when it was in its glory years. And it's basically her life story again. She's from Perth originally, and hard upbringing, but then goes, and then these books can be really. And then I met such and such, and that's me in the corner with the boys from Bros and all this kind of stuff. But it's not that. She's a very funny writer. She's got a healthy disrespect for the job and for the people that she meets. But also bits at other times where she's just like, oh my god, I can't believe. Insert name here, but Sylvia Patterson's In With the Band is definitely worth checking out. I think we should mention, because it was such big news, although the book came out last year, Graeme Macrae Burnet being nominated for the Booker Prize and being shortlisted for the Booker Prize this year, which was astonishing, really. Small publishers again, Saraband Books, Contraband, which is an offshoot of Saraband, so kind of even more niche. And yet, here it was kind of fighting for the biggest literary prize going.
Even more so, I think, because like the persistent, I'm sure we've talked about this before, if not on the podcast and certainly off mic, is how much of a struggle it still seems to be to have Scottish representation in the Booker. A lot of the time when you think about it, like the only Scottish winner of the Booker Prize in its entire history is Kelman, which is over 20 years ago now. And it seems astonishing given the richness and depth of the Scottish literary scene that that's still the case.
Ali Smith's been nominated a couple of times,
but and so for his bloody project to then like come from quote unquote humble beginnings like that and make it one of the shortest days is absolutely staggering.
I'm really pleased because it's a brilliant book, and if you haven't read it yet, you really should. Graeme's a great writer, and Saraband are one of these publishers, these small independent publishers who are willing to take risks. As I say, they're willing to take risks on stuff. I think there was actually an article in The Guardian about this just the other day, that the bigger publishers aren't going to look at these people and they're almost using the indie publishers to test the water with various readers, and then maybe try and take them away. And it's happened many times. I know it's happened in music, definitely, that small bands have done well on an indie label, and then EMI come up and hoover them up. But if we were nominating a Man of the Year, I would say Graeme Macrae Burnet was certainly my Man of the Year. I mean, it was an incredible thing. Just briefly, before I think we'll take a break because we've gone on for some time. So Alasdair Gray, who had a bad accident at the end of last year, and I went to a Songs for Scotland event just recently, and it was his first time back out in public, and that was great to see that he's kind of made a good recovery in that sense. And the other thing I went to see recently was I went 2 events in 1 week that James Kelman appeared at, which is incredible. It's like Brigadoon, and then 2 of them come along. That's all sorts of mixed nonsense. It's like Brigadoon, and then 2 of them come along at once. But it's a rare sighting. I think, particularly at the Gutter magazine party where he read his own short story, which is in this edition of Gutter, he seemed to really be enjoying himself, and he was getting a lot of warmth from a younger crowd than perhaps he knew. It was fantastic to see. He's 70 this year.
I think there's maybe something to that when you say like a younger crowd. Again, like it's always the way with guys who are ahead of their time. If you like, is like at the time, like Kelman's faced so much from critics over the years. Again, going back to the Booker, just the controversy around him winning that was just so astronomical, and the kind of ingrained class resentment I think that's projected on him by a lot of literary critics, and now you've got a generation of readers who have, come up with him as, the acme of Scottish literature.
Yeah,
he's like our one Booker winner. So he's
also writing in a dialect or in a local language is not that unusual, but when he did it, it really was.
Absolutely. So now you've got like a generation coming up who have grown up with him, essentially. He's always been there. He's always been a figure of the Scottish literary landscape, and kind of this, I don't want to say like eminent greed, or anything, but it's because he is still like, there's fire in his belly, and he's certainly not the establishment, but at the same time he is required reading if you're at all interested in Scottish literature. And I think like now people are who have grown up with him, always being there, like see absolutely nothing the matter with that.
No, absolutely.
Like it's not something that has to be fought against, it's just something that's accepted. So that's maybe why he gets such a great reception from like a younger crowd, because there's nobody there who still turns their nose up at him. It's just this is how it is.
Absolutely.
There's an acceptance there that he maybe didn't have before.
Well, it was great. It was great to see. Great to hear him reading something new and properly performing, because he's quite a presence on stage. Should also say he did have a novel out this year, Dirt Road, which if you get the chance to, I haven't reviewed it yet because there's various things, but it's perhaps the warmest thing he's ever written. It's about a father and son who go to America. There's loads of music in it, but written it all in his kind of inimitable style. I think we'll pause for a break, so we'll see you back after this. Cheers. So that was part 1 of the Scots Whay Hae end of year podcast, and I hope you found something which we talked about which piqued your interest enough to go and either see it or read it yourself. Next time round, as I said at the beginning, it's going to be music all the way, so we hope you'll join us for that. See you then.